Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a sunlit parlor where gossip stings sharper than any needle. Imagine the squeak of floorboards under heeled boots, the cloying sweetness of melting beeswax blending with rosewater perfume. Your corset digs into your ribs as you perch on a horsehair settee. Good luck breathing normally while decoding the layers beneath this so-called social event. You glance at the heirloom sampler above the mantel, its cross-stitched alphabet daring you to mispronounce psalm. 5 women work hoops in their laps, their thimbles flashing like tiny armor. A girl of maybe 14 struggles with her embroidery frame, her pricked fingertips leaving rust-colored constellations on the muslin. Historians estimate over 3 million American women participated in quilting bees between 1800 and 1860, but none ever admitted to botching a hexagon. Laughter ripples through the room as someone tells of old Mrs. Weatherby's parrot reciting temperance hymns. You reach for a ginger cookie, freeze, when your sleeve brushes a basket of crimson scraps. These aren't just fabric snippets, that calico with tiny elephants. Smuggled from a Boston dry goods shop, violating the 1807 Embargo Act. The quilters know you're new, their eyes flick to your unmarked thimble. No wedding band means they'll test you. A matron slides a hoop toward you, its taut linen already marked with a tree of life pattern. Your needle hesitates over the trunk, stitched too tight, and the design puckers like a scar. The woman to your left murmurs about border tensions with Mexico, her fingers twisting thread into perfect French knots. You nod like you care about manifest destiny, secretly noting her missing ring finger, factory loom accident, or something sharper. The parlor clock ticks like a metronome measuring respectability. Tea steeps too long bitterness, seeping through polite conversation. Someone mentions the new minister's wife, how her corset laces whisper during services. You pretend to adjust your petticoat, palming the note slipped under your saucer. Faded ink spells beware the yellow, sashing in shaky cursive. Quirky tidbit. That basket of scraps includes silk from a bride's veil, divorced after 48 hours when her groom mistook her sister for a hat rack. The group's leader, a widow in midnight blue taffeta, holds up a block pieced from men's waistcoat linings. Each fabric corresponds to a suitor from her youth, the wool once dyed bachelors. Your cuff snags on a protruding pin. Blood blooms on the muslin, 8 perfect droplets forming Orion's belt replica. The room stills. Historians still argue whether quilting circles used constellation patterns to guide freedom seekers, or just liked pretty star shapes. The widow produces a vial of vinegar, dabs your stain into a passable comet. Crisis averted for now. Outside, a dog barks at a passing carriage. Inside, 23 fans snap open in unison, a flutter of painted peacocks and rebuked scandals. You learn the hard way that praising a log cabin, Quilt's rustic charm, translates to insulting someone's grandfather's land claim. The oldest quilter, her cap ribbons yellowed with age, tuts at your uneven stitches. Her gaze lingers on your unlined palms, city hands unprepared for prairie winters. Silence falls as a maid brings the frame chandelier lower. Shadows warp the quilt in progress, geometric shapes becoming gallows, then baptismal fonts, then nothing at all. The widow hums Barbara Allen, her needle tracing the melody's rise and fall. You notice 3 stitches sewn backward, a marker for something, or just arthritic fingers. When the mantel clock chimes 7, the quilters roll their work with military precision. You're handed a linen bundle for next week, its contents suspiciously heavy. The widow smiles without showing teeth. Practice your feather stitch, dear, and do mind the wolves on Maple Street. As you exit, the 14-year-old presses a folded square into your hand, her embroidery depicting a house with smoke curling upward. One window's cross-stitched curtains hang crooked, a child's representation or a signal. You'll debate this while picking oakum from your half-finished block. Tonight, the taste of burnt sugar lingering from someone's secret flask. Tomorrow's frost will stiffen the leftover thread. And whatever truths bled through that embroidered sampler. But for now, the parlor door clicks, shut behind you, its carved roses guarding a century's worth of swallowed secrets. Your boot heel catches on the welcome mat. A thread from your skirt snags the brass knob. It dangles there, quivering like a question mark, as twilight swallows the street. Your fingers trace the sun-bleached cotton. That's not just any sackcloth under your touch. The quilter beside you snips a thread with her teeth. Drought year 38, she mutters. Every flower company logo's been picked out stitch by stitch, railroad barons, brands turned into cabbage roses. Experts think 1 in 5 pioneer quilts used repurposed grain sacks. Great panic desperation made decorative. You notice odd embroidery along the selvage, 3 coffee beans stitched in mud-brown thread. The widow across the frame chuckles, Granny's measuring system. 1 bean per cup drank stitching this block kept her sober till Lent. Laughter ripples through the bee needles flashing like minnows in a stream. The calico scrap in your palm feels heavier somehow, faded indigo bleeding into cream. Atlantic crossing, 1842, a voice murmurs. Sailors' uniforms yielded that dye. Their widows salvaged every scrap. Historians still argue whether quilts ever signaled underground railroad safe houses. But this navy triangle, it's cut from a drowned man's collar. His shipmates sewed his initials backward in the seam. Superstitious fools thought it'd confuse vengeful mermaids. Your thumb brushes against a nearly black patch. The room's warmth releases a briny smell. Lobster-bait sacks. Someone explains Maine coastwives traded clamshell buttons for them. The fabric still crusts with phantom salt. It pricks your skin like static. A girl of about 15 unfolds a hexagon quilt. Its center block glows sulfur yellow. Prison wagon canvas, she announces proudly. Guards tossed the tarp after a jailhouse fire Her aunt bargained 2 piglets for it. Faint scorch marks a circular patch near the edge. They say the warden's cigar started the blaze. You half expect the cloth to warm under your palm. It stays stubbornly cold. The oldest quilter slaps your wrist as you reach for a crimson scrap. That's morning crepe, child. 6 months. Wear minimum before cutting, proper respect. She shows her thimble, dented from pounding threads into funeral shrouds. Her black silk shimmers green where the light hits rot creeping in at the edges. Someone spills a basket of scraps. A printed cotton fragment flutters to your lap. Kentucky hemp, circa 1850. The plantation's owner trademark still visible through the dye. But turn it over. There's a bloodstain shaped like a quill pen. The room still someone begins humming, steal away. A toddler offers you a muslin square, the fabric's thin as a moth's wing. 56 stitches per inch, the slave cabin specialty they called freedom lace. If you hold it up to the window, the pattern spells a name in morse-code knots. No one mentions whose. Lemon verbena sachets pass hand to hand. Their perfume masks the sharp tang of lye soap. You press a scrap of checked gingham to your cheek. It's softer than a banknote's engraved scrollwork. Ohio mill girls soaked their fabric in buttermilk, explains a voice wrapped in pipe smoke. Made calico feel like Paris silk till the first wash. The widow produces a star pattern block, each point armored with whalebone stays. Nantucket wives work. They'd unravel their corsets during years-long whaling voyages. Ran out of thread by 1854, she deadpans. Had to use sealskin sinew, dreadful stuff squeaked in church. As dusk stains the windows crimson, the quilters fold their works with sacred precision. A single thread clings to your skirt, sunflower yellow against the wool. You go to brush it off, but the room holds its breath. The thread glows like a fuse in the dying light. The sunflower thread pulses against your skirt. It leads your eye to a quilt draped over a rocking chair. Moonlight spills through the window. Or is that candlelight reflecting off the silver needle in your hand? The quilt's borders writhe like grapevines. Until you squint, the leaves rearrange into compass points. Look with your fingers, not your eyes, whispers the widow. You trace the stitching and feel raised knots, 3 tight clusters at the north edge. A girl no older than 12 threads, a needle with crimson silk. 3rd knot means fresh horses wait at the creek, she murmurs. Her hands fly, transforming the grapevines into the Big Dipper's curve. Historians still argue whether quilts guided freedom seekers. But this one's backside tells tallies. Turn it over. The batting holds pressed dandelion fluff and burrs from along the Ohio River. The air smells, suddenly, of wet wool. Someone's unfolded a tattered log cabin quilt. Each cabin block hides a tiny cross-stitched figure, some holding lanterns, others clutching bundles. One shape's embroidered waistcoat buttons glow with real seed pearls. Found those in a hymn book's spine, cackles the quilter. Preacher never noticed his mite boxes were lighter come Sunday. Your stocking snags on a basket of scrap wool. It's barbed with dried fishhooks. Lobsterman's mending pile, 1850s. Rust stains bloom like roses on the gray fabric. A teenager plucks out a hook. Granddad sewed these into hems during the Fugitive Slave Act. She demonstrates how the curved metal could slice through rope bonds. The widow nods approval. Her own apron hem jingles with hidden thimbles. Someone passes you a block stitched with peculiarly lumpy thread. Horsehair from the racetrack, explains a voice. Abolitionists smuggled messages inside hollow strands. Betting slips carried maps to free states. You roll a strand between thumb and finger. It still smells of leather and sweat. Most think the Underground Railroad ran on lantern signals. Few remember the jockeys who rode dusk to dawn with coated whinnies. The toddler from earlier tugs your sleeve. Her doll's dress is quilted with what looks like ordinary 9-patch blocks. Hold it to the candle. Coal dust lines the seams. Plaything or warning. The pattern mirrors a nearby coal chute's hidden compartment, big enough to hide a grown man. Auntie says it's just shadow work, the girl lisps. Her dimpled finger rubs at a smear that might be boot blacking. A crash of china makes the room gasp. Someone's dropped a teacup full of bone buttons. The oldest quilter sweeps up the shards, save the calico ones. They're stamped with steamboat schedules. You pluck a button from the floor. Its painted flower petals form Roman numerals. 3 petals equal 8 o'clock. 14 petals mean the dockmaster's been bribed. Experts think quilt codes were mostly symbolic. These stains and stitches suggest otherwise. Moonlight shifts. The grapevine quilt's constellations ripple like water. You spot a new shape, a runaway's bundle stitched upside down near the binding. Flip it at the state line, murmurs a voice behind you. The fabric's underside shows a willow tree with 2 knots on its trunk. Safe house mileage or gravesite markers. The quilters hum a tune that's definitely not swing low. It's livelier, with a tempo like galloping hooves. A baby wails in the next room. The widow tucks a scrap of Irish lace into its cradle. Look closer. The lacework's delicate holes spell out latitude coordinates. Boston, Philadelphia. The infant gums the numbers into shapelessness. Its mother's smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. You're handed a quilt block stiff with wax. Candle drippings seal the edges. Underneath, someone's written names in berry juice ink. Half are faded beyond reading. The others include a ship's captain and a senator's wife. Diary entries, shrugs the teenager. Safer than paper when the marshals came knocking. The wax cracks as you bend the fabric. It releases a scent of fierce sweat and beeswax. Near midnight, someone lights a lamp with a lens made from a mason jar. The beam illuminates a quilt hung over the hearth. At first glance, it's a simple churn dash pattern, but the intersecting lines form almanac symbols. A frog means spring floods. 3 crows predict bounty hunters. A mouse silhouettes embroidered near the hem, its tail pointing toward the chimney. Everyone avoids sitting in that corner chair. The toddler's doll slips from your lap. Its head knocks against a tin of needles. They spill across the floor, forming an arrow pointing east. No one comments, but the widow suddenly hums louder. Your stockinged foot brushes the nearest needle. It rolls until its eye aligns with a knothole in the floorboards. Through the hole, you glimpse a lantern being lit in the cellar. 3 quick flashes, followed by darkness. As the mantel clock chimes 1, the quilters begin rolling their works into tight bundles. The grapevine quilt disappears inside a flour barrel, its stars muffled by rye. Someone presses a scrap into your hand, 3 stripes of indigo on homespun. For remembering, they whisper. It smells of lie and hope, the exact shade used to mark abolitionist safe houses. You tuck it into your bodice, next to your racing heart. The widow blows out the last candle. Moonlight catches her smile. Her teeth glint like 10 polished needles. Her smile fades as moonlight finds the morning quilt draped across her lap. Black silk, puckered where salt water dried. You kneel pretending to adjust your shoe, but really studying the stitches. What first looked like teardrops reshape themselves into dandelion seeds as the widow hums. Each exhale makes the thread shiver, wildflower stems growing where grief once pooled. 3 other women scoot their chairs closer, their own needles pausing above rust-brown calico. Full mourning lasted a year in polite society. Black silk rustling like dead leaves, but this widow's cuffs show 2 inches of violet tulle, half-mourning hues creeping in after 17 months. Historians still argue whether these fabric-based grieving rules liberated or confined women. Your nose wrinkles at the silk's vinegar scent. They preserved dresses with chamomile and regret. The widow's thimble clicks against a button you almost mistake for jet. Look closer, it's whittled bone, its center drilled through with a lover's knot. My Henry's collar stud, she murmurs. Her needle dips, pulling thread through silk, so rotten it hisses. The quilted patches beneath smell of churchyards and turned soil. You swear the batting shifts like something alive. A girl offers her a spool of gray thread. The widow shakes her head, plucks 3 strands from her own braid instead. Hair holds memory better than flax, she explains. Her hands weave the chestnut threads into a climbing rose's stem, thorns sharp enough to prick. Someone remarks that mourning quilts often outlasted tombstones in prairie settlements, whether erodes stone faster than spite preserves stitches. You notice the quilt's backing, muslin printed with faint ledger lines. Henry's plantation accounts, the widow says without looking up. Stole the ledger the night they lynched him. Her scissors snip through a cotton rosebud. Its petals flutter down as confetti. The mainstream histories never mention how often widows repurposed KKK robes into quilt linings. But the evidence crinkles beneath her needle. Her humming Gaines words now abide with me, but waltz time, incongruously cheerful. Your finger follows the melody's path across the quilt. Stitches form cursive letters in the border. YREH Henry backward. The widow catches your gaze, her scissors flash. As they sever the Y, spelling mistakes happen. She deadpans. The candle gutters. You pretend not to see her tuck the clipped thread into a locket. A crash of scattered buttons makes everyone jump. The widow's mourning brooch has sprung open. Inside, a twist of hair, 2 mule teeth, and a miniature scalpel. Midwifery tools, she explains too quickly. You recognize the instruments from calomel abortion pamphlets. The quilt slips further down her lap as she leans to retrieve them. Midnight wind ripples through the room. The quilt billows like a storm cloud. Tendrils of silk catch on your wrist as if pulling you closer. Clouds part. Moonlight reveals a starburst pattern in the quilt's center. 36 points, 1 for each month since Henry's funeral. At the 13th point, the stitches change color rusty brown instead of black. The cholera summer of 52, perhaps. Entire church choirs buried by Tuesday. Someone sneezes. The widow whips a handkerchief from her sleeve. Its scalloped edge matches a missing corner of the quilt. Cotton's scarce during epidemics, she shrugs. Historians note that blackberry husk dyes replaced imported mourning crepes when ports closed. But most don't mention the berry stains, doubling as typhoid quarantine markers. The quilt's center sags. Something heavy hides between the layers. Before you can react, the widow plunges her hand through a torn seam. She withdraws a tintype, Henry's face scratched out with a nail. Don't want him haunting new soil, she mutters. Her needle flashes, sewing the photograph into a crow's beak on the quilt. When she hums again, "It's my Bonnie lies over the ocean," but the rhythm sinks with a shovel digging. Candle wax pools around a loose thread. It hardens into a question mark. You think of Henry's unmarked grave, the quilting women's quick hands. Maybe mourning stitches weren't about grief at all, just maps for the living to outrun the dead. The widow knots her thread with a snap, final as a slamming ledger. You drift toward a cedar trunk in the corner, its brass hinges crusted with age. 29 quilts spill over the edge, each a year measured in absent suitors' footsteps. The spinster's thimble gleams dully. As she unfolds the topmost quilt, herringbone seems marching like prison bars across faded chintz. Hepzibah's cage, she mutters, picking at a frayed corner with bird-like precision. Every proper 19th century bride needed 13 quilts before her wedding. This woman made 29 waiting for a groom who never knocked. Thin winter light stripes the quilt's surface. You squint at the stitching. Those aren't flowers in the border. Hundreds of tiny padlocks chain the panels together. Took a whole summer to perfect the devil's claw stitch. The spinster says, twisting her needle like a locksmith's pick. Census records show 1 in 5 women never married back east. But out here, every cabin had at least 2 extra ladies darning socks by lamplight. She flips the quilt. Sunlight reveals words embroidered along the seams. Thursday last, Mr. Tibbs asked to court my plum preserves instead of me. The ink's iron gall faded to sepia ghosts. Historians love debating whether spinster diarists exaggerated their loneliness. But that tight cross-stitch screams truth. You lean closer. She snaps the quilt shut. A muffled clink comes from the trunk's depths. The spinster hauls up quilt 17, its center bulging suspiciously. Metal jingles as she rips a seam. Dozens of brass buttons cascade onto the floor. Returned gifts, she shrugs. Felt poetic to sew suitors' promises into something useful. One button winks up at you, West Point insignia gleaming. Guess Cadet Ellsworth preferred battlefield glory over Iowa winters. Rain taps the window. The spinster lights a lamp with hands steadier than your own. Quilt 23 emerges, stained crimson near the hem. Don't fret, it's pokeberry juice, she chuckles, but her eyes dart to a locked drawer below the trunk. Scholar Ada Whitcomb once found grocery lists stitched into quilt batting, turnip prices hidden beneath appliqued doves. Wonder what secrets this red smear guards. The spinster's needle dips into a pincushion shaped like a heart. It bleeds emery sand when squeezed. Mother's notion bag, she says, outlived her by 38 years. You notice a date stitched inside the cuff of her sleeve, June 12, 1853, the day her sister married the blacksmith. Or the blizzard that froze every bachelor within 50 miles. She unfolds quilt 8, the only one with cheerful yellow sashing. Buttercup petals dot the corners until you realize they're all 6-petaled instead of 5. Hex signs. Protection against false suitors, maybe, or invitations to the fae. Her scissors hover over a cluster of stitches. Snip, a curl of hair slips free. Traveling preacher promised to write, she murmurs. Fool me thrice. The hair crisps in the lamp's flame. Wind rattles the trunk's lid. A scrap of indigo flannel escapes. You catch it midair. The spinster hisses like a cornered cat. That's not for touching. The fabric's rough shorn edges frame 3 letters chain-stitched in gold. JSP. Her breath quickens as she stuffs it between quilt 12 and 13. Mainstream museums display spinster quilts as sad relics. They never x-ray them to find hidden wedding vows sewn backwards. She slumps against the trunk, her bonnet strings unraveling. 20 years, I pieced lone star blocks for brides younger than my apron. A bitter laugh. Buried 7 grooms in those quilts. Fever picked them off like overripe apples. Historians still argue whether prolific quilters were expressing creativity or screaming through linen. You study quilt 29's jagged stitches, more hatchet marks than embroidery. The spinster yanks a ribbon from her collar attached to a rusted key. For the cedar trunk, she says, dropping it into your palm. Her fingernail traces a winding vine along the quilt's edge. Follow the pattern. It spells jilt in Greek, Latin, and what might be Choctaw. When you look up, she's gone. Only the smell of cedar and scorched hair lingers. Quilt 30 peeks from the trunk, still half-stitched. Its center block holds a mirror framed by thorns. You angle it toward the lamplight. 29 reflections fracture across the glass. In each shard, a different face peers back suitors who never came, sisters who left, the woman she almost was. The final block remains empty, a white expanse, as vast as unplowed prairie. Your fingers itch for a needle, but whose story gets written here? You kneel beside a quilt spread across the floor, its corners weighted with dented thimbles, too large for child hands. The muslin trembles as a draft sneaks under the parlor door. 9 crooked X's ripple like graves in miniature. My cholera map. A girl's voice says behind you, all pride and missing front teeth. She points to a cluster of stitches near the hem. That's where Ma burned Tommy's mattress after. The thread snarls around February 3rd, the night her brother stopped sweating. 19th century kids did 40% of textile work. Little fingers, better suited for fine seams than plowing fields. This one's nails are bitten to the quick. A thimble rattles loose on her pinky. A woman coughs across the room. The girl jumps to straighten her seams. You spot blood blooming where her needle slipped, 3 dots forming a crude triangle. Mothers once called such stains honor badges, proof a daughter could endure. Historians still argue whether those rusty smears were accidents or silent rebellions. The girl licks her thumb, wipes the reddest dot into a long smear. She tugs at your sleeve, her palm upturned. A blue string winds around her wrist like a vein. Found it in the privy hole. Mr. Hewitt says it's from a French dolly. Dead rats. Maybe, but you nod as she stitches it into the quilt's border. A periwinkle river cutting through X-marked land. The parlor clock wheezes. The women shift closer to the fire. The girl's quilt now drapes your knees. You feel every knot she hid beneath the batting. 18 tiny lumps press against your leg's buttons. Teeth. Her shadow stretches long as she leans over your shoulder. Ma says, I'll finish this when the baby comes. The empty corner where December should be gapes. A single thread dangles like an unspooled fate. Someone drops a knitting basket. The girl freezes mid-stitch. Her needle hovers above a fresh patch of muslin, snowflakes outlined in black thread. They don't let me touch the real mourning cloth, she whispers. Census records show 1 in 10 children died before quilting age, but this girl's counting backward. Her scissors snip the air, casting star-shaped shadows. Baby gets the X's. I'm sewing moons now. A muffled wail pierces the ceiling. The women glance up, then away. The girl stuffs her mouth with peppermint, offers you one from a twist of stained paper. It tastes of camphor and dirt, keeps the miasma out, she recites, rolling the candy against her molars. Victorian doctors swore sweets prevented sickness. Never mind the rotted teeth they left behind. Her tongue flashes crimson when she laughs. She grabs your hand, presses it to a quilt block sewn with sunflower seeds. Pa's belt buckle heated these. The seeds crackle under your palm, splitting into jagged halves. Girls on the Oregon Trail did this to predict storms, though you suspect hers foretell different omens. A seed embeds in your lifeline. She slaps your wrist. Don't lose it. That's how you pay the ferryman. The parlor door creaks. A wraith of a woman beckons. The girl folds her quilt with military precision, X's aligned like soldiers on furlough. Her pinky brushes a bloody stain near June's square, leaving a faint fingerprint. Next time, she says, I'll show you where I buried the twins' shoes. The door closes, your legs itch, where her quilt's secrets burrowed into skin. Rain drums a sudden staccato. You shake out the muslin. 2 bone buttons clatter to the floor. Your thumbnail digs at dried blood in the August square. It flakes away. But the scent lingers, hyssop and rust and sugar rot. When the lamp gutters, you swear the X's crawl westward, each stitch a child's-turned crow's foot, fleeing the reaper's shadow. You trace the quilt's top layer first, prim crosses stitched with Sunday school precision. But flip a corner, drunken zigzags coil beneath like snakes in sacramental wine. The preacher's wife winks as she smooths the fabric, her thimble dented from pounding temperance pledge nails. Our youth group's masterpiece, she announces to nodding bonnets. No one mentions the scarlet flannel patches sewn backwards, rough side out, to snag passing pockets. Each red square bulges with coins for old man Harkness, town drunk, and the preacher's disowned brother. Reverend's sermons denounce spirits, twice weekly, since Harkness opened his competing tavern. Pewter needles click faster when the man himself limps past the window. Someone hums Rock of Ages, off-key. You pretend not to notice the quilt edge lifting, a flask-shaped lump rolling toward Harkness's shadow. Temperance quilts often fundraised for moral causes. This one buys whiskey neat. The preacher's wife demonstrates proper cross-stitch. Her sampler verse condemns wine that by day like a serpent. Beneath her lectern, a girl stitches drunk into the quilt batting, backwards, letters legible against the window light. Historians still argue whether these hidden taunts were sabotage or secret solidarity. You accidentally spill the thread basket. Scrambling to gather spools lets you spot the real artistry. The quilt's backing mirrors the floorboards of Harkness's, tavern-stained ochre and reeking of regret, clever using onion skins for yellow dye. The preacher's wife slides a peppermint across your knee, wrapped in last Sunday's sermon notes. For the miasma, she whispers. Her breath smells of elderberry wine. Census records show 23% of temperance leaders kept liquor at home, medicinal purposes. Naturally, a red patch comes loose in your hands. 3 copper pennies clatter onto your lap. Harkness tips his hat through the glass. Coins dance across the sill into his palm. The preacher's voice booms unexpectedly from the vestibule. Wives become a blur of snatching scissors and right-side-up Bibles. Someone flips the quilt. Crosses now face the ceiling in meek rows. Only the scent betrays them, French brandy and pennyroyal seeping through starched cotton. You revolve, sermon notes crumpled in your fist. The girl who spelled drunk now demurely stitches a dove. Her thread glows blue, same dye used in Harkness's tavern sign. As the benediction starts, she pricks her finger, smearing blood into the dove's beak. Nobody comments on the scarlet smirk. Night rain blurs the chapel windows. You linger under pretense of fixing a hem. The quilt breathes when the room empties, drunken stitches swelling like a drunkard snores. Under the final cross, you find Harkness's IOU, 34 years old and still unpaid. The paper dissolves in the holy water font, ink running gray as a preacher's conscience. Your boots stick to the floorboards on the way out, molasses or sacramental wine. Doesn't matter. Behind you, the quilt ripples, its hidden snakes now spelling Amen in cursive coils. The lamp extinguished, you swear you hear coins clinking in the baptistry. But that could just be the rain or the distant jingle of a tavern doorbell. You stumble into moonlight, still clinging to tavern musk. The quilting bee relocated to Widow Peabody's back porch. Fireflies mimic scattered sequins as you settle between two grandmothers. Their scissors rasp through calico, blades sharpened on tombstone niches. One slides a thimble for your untouched finger, its inside etched with Latin even the parson can't translate. Moth wings brush your neck, or is that Mrs. Hendricks's breath? She leans close, her cap ribbons smelling of camphor and clover honey. Such lovely chaos tonight, she murmurs, nodding toward the quilt frame. Women's hands move like spiders on a web, patching mismatched silks into uneasy harmony. A sneeze interrupts. The youngest matron drops her husband's handkerchief. It floats, suspended as regret, before landing splayed across the quilt in progress. Embroidery glows in lamplight, JPW, stitched with military precision. Problem is, her husband answers to Elihu Cobb. The porch stills, needles freeze midair. Handkerchiefs were love's currency back then, sprinkled with cologne or rosewater. But this one reeks of jasmine, a scent sold only at Stoddard's apothecary 3 towns over. Someone coughs. The Widow Peabody plucks the cloth away, her knuckles whitening around the monogram. Menfolk misplace things, she declares. Threads snap as she yanks, ripping the linen square from the quilt's grip. Pins clatter to the floorboards. You bend to retrieve one and spot the real scandal. Beneath the frame, tucked behind a basket of thimbles, lies a man's waistcoat. The fabric matches the handkerchief exactly. Same navy broadcloth, same brass button shanks. Its inner pocket gapes, a daguerreotype case peeking out. 2 faces smile up, Elihu Cobb's arm around a milliner from the neighboring county. Fetch more beeswax. Someone orders. A teenager scurries away clutching empty tins. Mrs. Hendricks's elbow accidentally knocks over the lamp. Shadows swallow the waistcoat for now. The widow hums Barbara Allen through clenched teeth, her needle puncturing fabric with extra force. Historians still argue whether stray garments in quilts signaled rebellion or regret. You study the suddenly rigid spines around you. County records mention 17 breach of promise suits tied to textile evidence. The waistcoat vanishes, replaced by a jar of blackberry preserves. Someone's offering you a biscuit too loudly. Moonlight sharpens when the milliner herself arrives, uninvited. Her famous hat bobs with peacock feathers, each eye a judgment. She lays a bundle on the frame, pre-cut triangles of blush satin for the wedding quilt. She trills, smile, slicing the humid air. The shapes form a lover's knot pattern, or maybe hangman's nooses, depending on perspective. Widow Peabody's shears bite into satin. Tension hums like a loom's warp, threads strained to breaking. The peacock feathers tremble. You examine a triangular scrap. Its reverse shows faded stains. Lip rouge. Wine. The milliner catches your glance. Her laugh tinkles false as paste jewelry. Men's muffled voices drift from the barn. Another quilting bee tradition. Grooms prepare there, while brides stitch here. Except Elihu Cobb's polishing the same rifle he'll later misfire accidentally. The waistcoat reappears suddenly, draped over the quilt frame like a challenge. Its lining gapes empty. The daguerreotype now nestles in your apron pocket, hot as a live coal. Mrs. Hendricks forgets and lights a second lamp. The milliner's satin scraps blaze, revealing pinprick messages along the edges. 10 tiny holes, morse-code for falls. You cough tea across the quilt. Apologies, cover your sleeves, hasty swipe. The stains now blur the accusation. Dawn approaches. The sky pales like unbleached muslin. Women pack away shears with exaggerated care. No one mentions waistcoats or rouge stains. The quilt lies finished, a masterpiece of double weddings, bridged by a chain of forked cedars. Only you notice. The cedar trunks twist into cursive J's and P's and W's. The milliner departs first, her peacock feathers shedding an iridescent trail. Elihu Cobb stumbles from the barn, rifleless. Blood blooms on his sleeve, a fresh thorn scratch, or perhaps a message. His eyes dart to the quilt, then widen. The lover's knot now resembles a coiled whip, one satin loop darkened with his own stain. Widow Peabody blocks his path, offering blackberry jam on a cracked plate. For your bride, she croons, dipping her finger in the jar. The preserves ooze crimson, same shade as the quilt's new embellishment. Cobb retreats, crushing a peacock feather under heel. Its mournful cry lingers, or maybe that's just the wind through the cedars. You slip the daguerreotype into his saddlebag. Let marital negotiations begin. The quilt gets folded with ritual slowness, its layers pressed between hymnbook pages. As the bee disperses, Mrs. Hendricks presses a scrap into your palm, navy broadcloth edged with masculine stitching. For remembrance, she whispers. It smells of gunpowder and jasmine long after she's gone. The gunpowder stench clings to your hands, even after scrubbing. Mrs. Hendricks's scrap still tucked behind the salt box. Next Thursday's quilting bee reeks of lye soap and something sharper. A militiaman's coat dominates the frame, its gray wool pocked with holes that still whisper of mini balls. Salvaged from Cold Harbor, someone mutters. You count 18 patches, each repair tighter than a surgeon's stitch. The original buttons are gone, replaced by carved cedar discs. One splinters under your thumb, scenting the air with funeral incense. Quilts made from soldiers' coats weren't uncommon. The Smithsonian has 3 from Gettysburg, but this one's different. The inner lining bulges oddly, tufts of horsehair escaping the seams. Mrs. Peabody claims their insulation. The new widow buyers spits into her thread. Southern wives used hair from fallen mounts as quilting yarn. The horrors in what's missing. A child-sized handprint stains the left sleeve, pressed there before the blood dried. You trace its outline, smaller than your palm. Historians still argue whether field nurses wrapped infant corpses in spare uniforms. The coat's owner had no children. Someone passes a whiskey flask disguised as a pincushion. You decline. The widow buyers drains it instead. Her needle wobbles, patching a hole that isn't a hole. The fabric's pristine there. She's recreating the wound that killed her Joshua. Her thimble clicks against bone buttons, scavenged from cousin's burial clothes. A sneeze rips through the room. Gunpowder residue triggers allergies. The widow jabs her finger. A crimson bead pools on gray wool. No one reacts. You've all grown accustomed to bloodstains. The coat's pockets produce fragments. A harmonica reed, 3 wheat kernels, a lock of hair too coarse for any buyers. The widow knots them into the batting, secret constellations, under Virginia cotton. Her scissors snip recklessly. She's left the final bullet hole unmended. Let the dead breathe, she growls. Moonlight reveals the truth. Those patches form a crude map of the James River. Or maybe it's just the whiskey talking. You fold the finished quilt, its weight disproportionate to the fabric. Something clinks in the binding, a spent cartridge sewn into the hem. The widow coughs, a wet, hollow sound. She departs clutching her creation, a burial shroud for a son who left no body to wrap. Your hands smell of ghostly gunpowder for days. The widow buyer's gunpowder ghosts still haunt your fingernails until a new stench overpowers them. Mary Gooden slams her quilt frame onto the trestle table, mildewed linen reeking of lie and hopelessness. Her hands, redder than fire ants, count knots along the binding. 47, in all each, a month past her indenture's supposed end. Indenture contracts rarely exceeded 7 years, not that it mattered. Masters added clauses like fiddlehead ferns, sprouting new obligations each spring. You finger a greasy patch, rendered hog fat, waterproofing torn seams. Scholars claim some servants stitched escape maps into bedsheets. This reeks of vengeance, not geography. Mary's stitches stagger like drunkards, crude crosshatches holding burlap scraps. Beneath the top layer, a coil of black hair curled through the batting. The widow buyer's hisses, folklore claims hair, curses its owner when stitched upside down. Mary spits on the quilt, naming the master who kept her 12 years beyond papers. Forbidden to read, she invented a tally system using stolen embroidery thread. Sundays marked with blue snippets from the mistress needlework basket. Historians still argue whether hair in quilts signified remembrance or revenge. Mary's creation hums with darker intent. A rusted hook hides between layers. Its curve matches the master's tobacco knives. The group shifts, uneasy, witch trials, hanged women for lesser crimes. Mary cackles as she works, stitching his initials backward into a Lemoyne star. Contract law meets folk magic when the linen rips, faded ink along the selvage bleeds through. Charlotte repeats 17 times, the sister sold to a Baltimore shipwright. Your thimble snags on a lump, 9 teeth knotted in horsehair beneath the batting. Dawn reveals the quilt's true pattern, storm clouds stitched from ash-gray wool. Mary claims she worked during thunderstorms, her master too drunk to notice lightning in the thread. You pocket a stray tooth, tiny ships etched into its surface. The curse takes root, whether you believe or not. When the church bell tolls noon, Mary's quilt shows no proper blocks, just 47 knots throbbing like fresh welts, and that dark hair curling through the layers like smoke. Mary's curse still prickles your palms when the parlor door creaks open, stitchers part, like wheat before a reaper. The town's new bride slumps in the corner, her fevered fingers tangling wedding ring quilt blocks with funeral shrouds. Typhoid does queer things to the mind. Historians note women stitching entire family trees backward during delirium tremens. You kneel beside her frame, chintz fabric blurs between peacocks and storm clouds. Scarlet thread veins the cloth like cracked porcelain, laudanum drips, staining half the seams. She hums a lullaby meant for infants, not brides of 17. Burn the roses, she whispers, stitching black petals around her initials. Victorian herbalists claimed charred flowers warded off miasmas. This smells like a different protection rite. Her thimble clatters, revealing a wedding band fused to her ring finger. The group murmurs about consummation night, how the groom fled west after seeing her pustules. You trace an embroidered verse along the border, forever entwined bleeding into fever confined. 19th century asylum, records overflow with women committed for quilted gibberish. Hers might been poetry. Her needle dips into a jam jar, rusty liquid clinging to the linen. The widow buyer sniffs beef blood or mercuric chloride. Doctors prescribed both during the 1850s typhus panics. Stitches morph from precise chain stitch to jagged X's, a diary of descending sanity. A patch near the binding shows the town square, its church steeple stitched upside down. You peel back the top layer, childhood doodles swarm the batting. Stick figure parents hold hands with a girl labeled Ellie, the bride's pet name lost to etiquette manuals. She suddenly sits upright, pupils swallowing irises like solar eclipses. They're singing in the threads. Silk ribbons cascade from her sleeves as she works, blue for true love, black for betrayal. Historians still argue whether quilt patterns eased female hysteria or documented it. Nightfall brings worsening tremors. The final block shows a house with sealed windows, flames embroidered in phosphorescent thread. You recognize the silhouette. The groom's Boston row house, burned 2 weeks after their unconsummated marriage. By dawn, her stitches slow to funeral shroud pace. The last knot tightens as her breath stills. Burnt rose petals flake onto the quilt. The women unwrap the layers post-burial. Their gasps stir the still parlor air. There, beneath the chaotic vines of her bridal bouquet, a name glows in reverse stitching. Ellie blooms bold as heartblood, where the formal Aliner should reign. The quilt becomes her truest marriage certificate, a girl's identity, reclaiming itself through feverish fingertips and defiant thread. Silk hisses through Mrs. Van der Meer's fingers, a sound like snakes shedding skins. You recognize the imported brocade. Boston's elite wore it during the 1840s tariff protests. Her stitches devour the fabric, hiding moth-riddled edges beneath pleats. A banker's wife mustn't show weakness, not with her husband's railroad stocks, bleeding value faster than a gut-shot stallion. 3 layers down, the quilt's guts shame its gilded surface. Coarse Osnaburg lines the back, same cloth paupers use for burial shrouds. She pauses, rubbing a raw spot where gold thread snapped mid-stitch. Historians cataloged 8 financial panics before 1860. This woman's needlework documents the 9th. Admire the fleur-de-lis pattern. She insists, voice tighter than a corset stay. You note the French motifs copied from a sharecropper's quilt, stitched by a woman paid in cornmeal. The irony thickens when her emerald ring snags, dragging a sequined applique into something resembling a stock market crash. Moonlight reveals her secret. Every 3rd stitch loops backward. A laundering trick from ochre patch quilters, strengthening work meant to last generations. She's mending more than fabric stitching, vest buttons into the lining where gemstones once sat. The widow buyers coughs pointedly. You recognize the almanac's latest gossip. They say Central Pacific stocks fell slowern, a drunk turtle yesterday. Mrs. Van der Meer's thimble dimples the silk, leaving a mark like a bullet hole. Midnight chimes shake loose a truth. Her needle case overflows with pawn tickets. 18-karat gold thread winds around receipts for candlesticks and chafing dishes. Auctioneers called such items distressed silver, but there's nothing silvery about this desperation. You find the master stroke near dawn, a bloodstain camouflaged by crimson embroidery. 19th century pawn ledgers prove women pawned wedding bands more often than men sold watches. But you've never seen evidence stitched so boldly. The blotch blooms where her rocking chair snagged a cuticle months of nibbling worries made flesh. She startles when a pearl rolls across the floor. Its hollow center betrays paste. The other quilters pretend not to notice, their needles flying faster. One mutters about cholera quilts hiding quarantine warnings. This feels darker. Avarice makes poor thread, clucks the widow, dropping a snippet of homespun into Mrs. Van der Meer's lap. The imported silk shudders. A moth escapes its gilded prison. Historians still argue whether quilting bees prompted bank runs, how fast whispers traveled in petticoats versus ledger books. First light exposes the damage, entire panels disintegrating like wet newsprint. You spy something gleaming in the batting, a railroad spike's twisted remains. Pawnshops wouldn't touch it, too heavy with dead dreams. Her final stitch snaps audibly, a pistol crack of breaking linen. The women pack their needles, without speaking the unspoken rule of wealthy downfalls. Only the clatter of a collapsing hoop breaks the silence, steel ribs giving up the ghost. As you leave, a scrap of silk clings to your skirt, its once vibrant peacock, now a plucked hen. You wonder if she'll unravel the whole quilt tonight, selling strands to whatever fool still believes in gilt-edged futures. The answer arrives as dawn breaks, 3 yards of French silk floating in the duck pond like a surrender flag. Your heel crunches dried corn husks inside the batting, stale whispers of last summer's harvest. This quilt feels heavier than most, stuffed with more than wool scraps and regret. A seam splits under your thumb, 9-patch blocks bleed prairie soil onto your skirt. Historians confirm quilts hung on clotheslines guided underground railroad runaways. But this one's secrets stay hidden in the stitching. You smooth the frayed edges, rough linen, scratches like a farmer's hands. 5 blue circles dot the backing, each slightly lopsided. Scholars argue whether frontier women encoded river crossings in their needlework. Your nail traces a threadbare Connecticut river. Corn tassels poke through the fabric, compass needles cured in brine and hope. 19th-century laundry records show starch formulas for hardening hems. This quilting's starch smells of maple sap and terror. 3 blocks bulge suspiciously. You unpick stitches with a hairpin. Scraps of newsprint cling to the stuffing. An 1842 almanac page cautions against October travel. The ink bleeds where her sweat fell, dates circled in lye soap. Auction notices leer from the margins. A girl named Jessamine sold with counterpane 6 years prior. Indentured till 21. Clucks Mrs. Peabody from behind her spectacles, fogged with judgment. She stabs her needle through a sunflower block, pretending not to witness your discovery. The other quilters hum Wayfaring Stranger, pitched higher than yesterday. An old trick to mask whispered plans. Their mothers did the same. You find the first cornhusk map. At twilight, needle-pricked holes mimic the Big Dipper. Southern constellations, confused northern runaways. So clever stitchers used crop rows instead. This husk diagrams a creek bed with 3 stones stacked like hymn books. Fringe archaeologists claim some quilts held edible moss patterns, hunger-friendly guides nibbled during flight. You lick a suspicious green stain, regret the bitter tang of mold. 4 more husks follow, each more desperate than the last. The 5th bears teeth marks and a smeared charcoal ex-diaries from the Erie Canal zone mention Ferryman. paid in quilt batting. Paddle wheels, churning up drowned cotton scraps. Your fingers brush a lump in the binding. A gutta-percha button etched with sailing coordinates. Pawn shops melted hundreds during the rubber famine. This one's worth more than its weight in defiance. Moonlight exposes the tragic math, 5 blue circles, but only 4 river threads. The 5th hangs loose, a snapped promise. Jailer's logs from Albany confirm a capture on New Year's Day, 1843, female indentured. Quilt in possession. Historians still bicker whether coded textiles aided runaways or just comforted them. The moth chewing this corner votes for rebellion. Mrs. Peabody accidentally spills her tea. The stain obscures the damning X. Her thimble taps twice on the quilt frame. A jailer's knock mimicked in morse code. You pretend not to hear rolling the gutta-percha button into your sleeve. Dawn finds the quilt scrubbed of evidence. 9 patch blocks restitched into bland geometry. Only the corn husks remember crumbling into dust when the widow buyer sneezes. You pocket a single thread, indigo-dyed and coarse as a barked shin. Later, you'll knot it around the button, a silent toast to river number 5. The quilt returns to its cedar chest, hollowed out now, like the girl who stuffed it with maps. Outside, wind riffles the cornfield, rose bending northeast toward some unfenced dream. The cabin's lone remaining window frames a quilt block-sized patch of sky, your world shrinking with each departing wagon. Neighbors peeled west like bark from a birch tree, some chasing gold lust, others joining Shoshone raids. Your letters back east grow shorter too, ink freezing in the pot before you spell loneliness. Your fingers rub the latest quilt, while so thin you count warps through the weft. Last year's had 24 log cabin blocks. This one barely manages 9. Historians note homesteaders unraveled old quilts for thread. Frontier tax records prove they taxed fabric hoards more than livestock. You unpick a faded rose. Its petals bleed into tomahawk shapes, stitched after the bent fork massacre. 3 yellow threads dangle exactly how many families stayed since spring planting. Mrs. Loomis left her cedar chest. Its moth-chewed corners hold a Nez Perce beadwork pattern book. You trace zigzags meant to honor salmon runs. Your needle instead shapes arrowheads from rotten curtain fabric. Some archivists swear settlers copied tribal quilt symbols to appease local leaders. Your thimbled finger pricks at the lie. A wind slices through chinked walls. You stuff quilt batting into cracks alongside dried onion skins. The almanac said onion paper curbs ague. Your cure smells like yesterday's stew and desperation. Outside, the creek wheezes past, its banks littered with abandoned bake pans and hope. Diaries from the Oregon Trail mention chuck wagons, discarding weight weekly. Your hearth holds a skillet worn translucent as window glass. 6-petal flowers bloom across your lap, each bloom mutating into hatchet blades near the border. You hum Barbara Allen off-key, the only ballad surviving your ice-locked root cellar. 19th-century invoices reveal Eastern mills traded fabric scraps for buffalo bones. You wonder which relative became buttons or glue. A porcupine quill pierces your thumb. Crusty penmanship guides insist they make superior needles. Moonlight unveils the quilt's hidden arithmetic, 37 tomahawks for 37 stolen horses. Your last neighbor traded his plow for a Comanche mare, found frostbitten, with Texas brands on her hooves. Historians still debate whether quilt patterns influenced the Medicine Lodge Treaty. Your stitches hiss that blankets only warm the living. Dawn finds you threading horsehair through bare grease, waterproofing seams against storms the almanac can't predict. The final block waits empty. You've nothing left but your hair and pride. Census logs list 14% attrition rates for female homesteaders. You're the decimal they rounded up. Needle poised, you pluck 3 graying strands and knot them into the backing. Wind shrieks through empty cabins that night, a discordant choir of loose shingles and shattered preserves jars. Your quilt stiffens in the cold, eyelets puckered like your mother's mouth. When you chose this life, some grad student will catalog it in 1934, mislabeling the tomahawks as stylized lilies. But tonight, it simply smothers the cough rattling your ribs since the first snow. You dream of Eastern mail carriers, their satchels bursting with gingham and apologies. Dawn's light reveals frost etchings on the quilt ice crystals, forming the word HEL before the fire dies. Your fingers graze a hexagon's edge. Sunlight exposes rust-colored rings, staining the ivory linen. 19th-century midwives often bartered quilts for deliveries, each patchwork baby swaddle doubling as a ledger. This one catalogs 83 births, though 12 hexagons ooze carmine, splotches wider than embroidery hoops. You catch bergamot and wormhood clinging to the batting. Protection, sachets stitched where stillborns' names should be. The quilter's journal surfaces beneath a mothballed christening gown. Her spidery script details spirit-blocking herbs, pennyroyal for warding off hauntings, chamomile to bless womb carriers. You snort at her footnote, recommending squirrel gallbladder tea for breech births, frontier DIY at its most questionable. A museum in Bakersfield displays similar quilts. Curators swear the brown stains are chocolate, not placental remains. Each fabric square corresponds to a lunar month. January's wool scratches like frostbitten lungs. July's muslin drips indigo sweat. Your nail catches on triple-stitched knots. Legend claims midwives tied them during contractions to bind the soul in place. The third hexagon from the corner gapes empty, its edges frayed by teeth marks. Diaries from the Oregon Trail mention women chewing quilt fragments during labor cheaper than laudanum, gentler than a whiskey-soaked rag. Beneath the batting lies a lock of jet-black hair, its braid woven with hawthorn berries and crow feathers. Historians still argue whether these were mourning tokens or attempts to redirect the evil eye. You count 7 hexagons patched with men's shirt fabric, source garments, perhaps outlived their wearers by decades. One floral scrap matches the dress in a tintype upstairs. Its wearer died, pushing twins sized like prize pumpkins. Moonlight transforms crimson rings into Rorschach blots, a screaming mouth here, a shotgun's silhouette there. Your candle drips tallow on a saffron patch. Beeswax was too precious for a midwife who traded in blood. The hearth's last ember dies as your thumb finds a hidden pocket. Inside, a walnut shell cradles teeth labeled Mary Alice, 1849. Dawn reveals the quilt's underside. Charcoal sketches of infants' faces peek through faded threads. Their eyes follow you, whether by trick of the grain or some quilter's witchy charm. A whiskey-smudged ledger falls from the quilt's folds. Its pages list temperance pledges in vinegar ink. You hold the fabric up to window light. Hundreds of names materialize like ghosts bearing sober confessions. The 1874 Woman's Christian Temperance Union made quilts to shame drinkers. Museum archives prove they displayed these in church basements. This one smells of starch and desperation. Someone scrubbed spilled gin from its binding a dozen times. Your nail snags on a frayed corner. Beneath lies a stashed flask shaped like a hymn book. Temperance advocates often carried these for medicinal brandy. Hypocrisy stitched right into their holier-than-thou posture. A patchwork teapot on the quilt's border contains hidden gin bottles, only visible if you cross your eyes just so. Historians still argue whether these secret designs mocked the movement or aided relapsing members. Threads glint strangely on the pledge signatures. You rub charcoal dust over them to reveal addresses of speakeasies. Clever girls, those temperance quilters, embroidered both sin and salvation in parallel rows. The backing fabric ripples under your palm. Newspaper clippings about prohibition raids quilted between layers. One headline screams demon rum defeated. Above, a gossip column detailing the mayor's absinthe-fueled antics. You trace a fractured chain pattern stitched in arsenic green thread. Each jagged link whispers danger. Local lore claims this warned of incoming whiskey wagons. 3 broken chains meant revenuers lurked nearby. A pocket hid beneath the binding yields love letters. A temperance leader's wife corresponded with a rum distiller. Her cursive tightens when describing his cedar-aged bourbon passion, pressed between Bible verses about damnation. Moonlight exposes a bloodstain near the center. Tour guides say it's dragon's blood pigment for dye. Forensic archivists counter its positive from a brawl over confiscated schnapps. Your candle gutters as you find embroidered rats gnawing the quilt's edges, symbols of alcoholism or crafty tavern owners. The answer depends on which drunken historian you ask at conferences. Dawn reveals lemon juice, fingerprints along the temperance pledges, invisible ink recipes traded at suffragette meetings. You press a warmth-activated patch to your coffee cup, A naked cabaret dancer shimmies across the fabric. The quilter's laughter lingers in every rebellious stitch, a middle finger stashed under cross-stitched piety. Beneath the last layer waits a sapphire brooch. Its engraving reads to my best customer. The Temperance Union president's portrait glares up at you. His cravat reeks of 100-year-old peppermint schnapps. The burlap bites your fingers rough as unrepentant history. These strips once carried cotton bales. Now they cradle dates freedom seekers memorized before dawn. Museum tags claim this quilt warmed slave children. You spot fourth-grade math problems stitched between patches. Harriet Tubman's allies used such counterpanes as teaching tools. Historians debate if this one came from Maryland or myth. Your thumbnail scratches, faded blue triangles, indigo made with fermented urine, and crushed elderberries. The stench lingers after a century, like a hipster's kombucha gone rogue. Hold the corner to December sunlight. Scrambled letters resolve into Stockton Safe House. 20 miles. Directions meant to fade before overseers noticed. Genius hiding in rot. A rust-colored braid snakes through the batting. The quilter's daughter wove her hair into the layers. Forensic folklore claims DNA survives in such strands. Labs refuse to test ethical nightmares. You find stitch holes where a name tag was removed, shame clinging to the absence. Beneath the cotton batting lies a wasp's nest fragment, desperation's insulation against Virginia winters. Some scholars' dissertation argues it symbolized rebellion, paper architects defying stone masters. You're just glad no live wasps remained. The back panel whispers under your palm. Needle-pricked constellations mirror the 1857 night sky. Follow the drinking gourd's handle due north, except this Big Dipper points southeast. Clever misdirection or quilter's error. Archivists still fistfight over lattes about that one. Rotting apple scent leads you to a hidden pocket. Inside, a walnut shell carved with cemetery maps. 3 X's mark herbs that purge tracking, hounds' noses. A recipe scratched near the stem. Modern reenactors tried it last fall. County sheriffs still tweet about the ensuing bear fiasco. Your candle reveals phantom stitches, cotton thread dissolved in vinegar to leave indentations. Literacy without evidence. Tracing them spells dig behind the smokehouse. But whose? The plantation's ruins became a fusion taco stand last April. A patch mimics the master's wallpaper. Tiny blood spots dye the peonies. Diaries mention seamstresses pricking fingers to stain stolen fabric, textile terrorism, with bodily fluids. You wonder if OSHA approved. Midnight chill lifts the quilt's odor, lard, lye, and something sweet rotting. 19th century fabric softener. Between 2 plates rests a chicken wishbone, blackened from wishful touching. Carbon dating can't measure hope. The final layer crumbles like ancient bark buried beneath it, a petrified sassafras root. Underground railroad guides chewed these for alertness. Your teeth leave grooves matching those in the splintered wood. For one breath, the past tastes bitter as cold brew on your tongue. Dawn exposes a shadowy stitch line along the border, a child's practice seam overcorrected 100 times. Modern quilting bees would call it flawed. You call it the prettiest rebellion never framed. The fabric feels rougher here, stitched with the righteous fury of a woman who graded papers. You trace 8 pointed stars that morph into A's at the corners, an alphabet, quilt fighting its own lesson plan. McGuffey's readers taught millions of pioneer kids. This Minnesota schoolmarm poked holes in their piety. Her cotton cue lacks the standard quail illustration. Instead, a shushing finger circles the letter. Q is for quiet now. The Z beside it bursts with sun rays labeled seal. Parents called it heresy. The school board demanded an explanation written in proper cursive. Beneath the Z, a pocket bulges with shredded primer pages. McGuffey's vocabulary lists chewed by rabbit teeth. Local legend claims her classroom pets were anarchist hares. You suspect rusty pinking shears did the nibbling. Historians still argue whether those sunray stitches point toward Seneca Falls or just a bad case of astigmatism. Either way, the seams smell of gunpowder residue. Her thimble was a repurposed mini ball from Shiloh, 19th century multitasking at its finest. A violet thread bleeds into the border. She overdyed mourning dresses to make protest banners. Each X and Y forms rifle sights aimed at the schoolhouse door. Modern eyes see a hashtag born a century early. When town matrons stormed her schoolhouse, bonnets quivering, she unpicked the entire alphabet overnight. What remained spelled equality in crooked cross-stitch. The E scavenged from a fertilizer sack's logo. Iowa's education board never noticed, too busy banning novels about sentient farm animals. Your fingertip snags on the orphaned Q. Its frayed edges suggest violent removal. Some say she mailed it to Susan B. Anthony as a bookmark. Others insist it lined a Pomeranian's bed in the Dakota Territories. The truth lies between stitches, probably darned into socks for a runaway student. Lemon verbena clings to the backing fabric. She washed her hands in abolitionist cologne. Each floral motif hides a tiny scales of justice doodle. Third graders called them pond lice. The board minutes disagree, accusing her of inciting geometric disobedience. The quilt lies flat now, its message louder than any school bell. You press your palm where Z's sunrays once blazed, the threads hum with forgotten spelling bees. Some rebellions don't need shouts, just a woman, a needle, and the good sense to rearrange the alphabet after dark. Sunlight slants through digger pine, resin your nostrils flare at sudden metal. Not gold dust. Scissors, 3 pairs hover over diamonds of Canton flannel, each snip a prospector's wife counting down to freedom. You catch the rhythm, 2 snips for claim jumpers, 3 for cholera reports, 4 if a husband's letter mentions Dancy Hall girls. bargaining starts in thread. A wandering foot block buys one rumor Jones Gulch flooded. A log cabin tilted left whispers of a strike by Chinese miners. The real currency, lone stars, each 8-pointed marvel trades for 2 letters from absent men. Watch Martha Dean hoard hers, 8 stars hidden beneath her shawl. That's 16 months of dearest wife lies waiting for cross-examination. Gold fever, infected sewing circles too. You finger a thimbleberry border, crocheted with actual wire. Molly O'Hara's dowry spoon melted down mid-stitch. Her groom died, panning fool's gold. She stitched pyrite flakes into the backing. They crumble to sulfur-scented dust. The real strike happens at Ida Styles's elbow. Her Dresden plate wedding quilt surrenders inch by inch filigree threads dropped into a stamped envelope. Postage for a Reno divorce notice costs 312 yards of French cotton. Her thimble taps Morse code against the scissors. Divorce or die trying. Men joked about petticoat miners, never guessing the term's accuracy. You lift a quilt corner, weighted with smuggled gold flakes sewn into prairie points. An 1852 Sacramento ordinance banned women from owning claims. So wives sewed assay reports into potholders, originals boiled in coffee to age the paper. Check the mantle. Those gilded acorn tassels, pure irony. They once trimmed Lola Montez's performance corset, bartered for 6 bushels of divorce petitions. Historians still argue whether Lone Star blocks were love tokens or ransom notes. Either way, husband's return addresses cluster near brothel-rich mining camps. A sneeze ripples through the circle. Not dust, pepper sachets sewn into quilt batting. Widows, anti-suitor technology. You smirk at a basket block stuffed with newspaper clippings. Bachelor buried in mine shaft, circled 17 times. Ida's final snip severs her matrimonial border. The scissors flash, a wedding gift from the same judge who'll grant her freedom. 3 weeks later, she'll board a stagecoach east, trailing liberated threads like conquest pennants. Till then, she stitches anonymity into a new sunbonnet, Sue the face blank, the bonnet bleeding indigo. Silence clots the air, they're listening for hooves. Every wife knows the cadence of a played-out claim. When the postmaster's mule brays, needles freeze mid-stitch. Martha Dean slips a lone star into her bodice. Tonight's letter better explain why her husband needs extra dynamite in San Francisco. You exhale coal oil lamp smoke, the quilting bee's original air freshener. Beneath the floorboards, a liberated quilt panel yellows with arsenic. Seems even fabric remembers how to poison. You climb creaking stairs. The banister wobbles like a drunkard's confession. 4th door on the left sticks. It always does when rain's coming. Inside, a girl stitches cumulus wisps onto muslin, her needle darting like a hummingbird's tongue. Tuberculosis keeps her bedbound since the cherry blossoms fell. Now her quilt predicts when they'll bloom again. Doctors called embroidery moral medicine for invalids. You spot the proof. Prescription slips sewn into the batting. 6. Stitches hourly to prevent morbid rumination. Her thimbles dented from tapping Morse code on the bed frame messages to the weather-vane cockatoo next door. Cotton batting doubles as a cloud journal. Cirrus for droughts. Nimbus layered thrice means flash floods. Locals arrive with seed packets and whiskey bribes. Old Man Peters swears her storm of 58 prediction saved his peach harvest. Never mind, she was stitching measles sores that week. Check the northeast corner. A knot of brown hair roots the batting to the backing. They say sleeping under hair-knotted quilts lets you climb into dreams. She calls them fairy ladders. Last full moon, Widow Cobb swore she woke up straddling a cumulonimbus. Threads tell darker tallies. Black silk patches mark lightning strikes, each year's tally rising. A scarlet zigzag recalls the barn fire that orphaned the Cooper twins. Historians still argue whether rural quilters truly believed their patterns controlled the skies, or just enjoyed watching farmers bow to bedspreads. You kneel, mattress feathers prickle your palms. Beneath the quilt, a 1862 farmer's almanac splayed open to cyclone diagrams. Its margins bristle with notes. Aunt Liddy's knee says no corn. Blue norther arrives when cardinals stutter. The girl winks her embroidery hoop hides a smuggled barometer. Lavender sachets crumble by the pillow. Their scent masks camphor, the real reason visitors don't linger. Tuberculosis wards off suitors better than any pepper-filled quilt. She threads her needle with gray silk. Stratus means the pastor's rheumatism will flare. The sky outside blazes cloudless. Neighbors prefer her lies. You watch Jade Carter pocket a cornhusk scrap, her stitches worn of locusts. He'll plant extra acreage anyway. Between the almanac and the quilt, desperation doubles the odds. She's running out of thread. Dusk bleeds through the window. Her scissors slice a sunset from wine-red silk. Tomorrow's high winds already pull at the loose ends. She coughs. A moth flees her handkerchief. The quilt shivers. Somewhere below, men check their almanacs and wonder why the pages stick together. Damp linen slaps your cheek as you push through hanging quilts, their geometric patterns snagging like curious fingers. A dozen needles freeze mid-stitch. These aren't parlor ladies. Work-worn hands cradle fabric scraps between Brigham young commemorative spoons. You've stumbled into Novu's last quilting circle before the 1846 exodus. Syrup buckets overflow with burlap strips, their prickly edges perfect for encrypting maps. Watch Sister Hawkins unpick a seam. The backing reveals compass roses stitched with horsehair. Each petal twists toward winter quarters. Historians still argue whether these quilts guided pioneers west, or just comforted women burying children along the trail. One quilt smells of fermented elderberries. That's intentional pour ink for stitching longitude coordinates. A teen bites her thread. The snap echoes Brigham's temple progress reports delivered through too thin walls. Her Dresden plate block hides a different temple. Its spirals replicate the original Novu floorplan. Beeswax candles soften in July's heat. They're smuggling wax impressions of temple keys. Check the batting. Carded wool conceals communion tokens. You blink. Was that a tithing receipt sewn into the binding? Sister Pike coughs pointedly. Her thimble clicks shaven a haircut against a teacup. The real treasure's underfoot. Lift the rag rug, 16 half-finished quilts moldering in brick dust. Persecution's coming. They'll bury these tonight, beneath the cooper's new outhouse. One block catches the light, an angel's face, stitched with silver wire from a martyr's pistol. Blood speckles a 9-patch, not persecution. Clarissa Webb broke her nose, sneaking temple chalk from Carthage jail. The circle giggles as she dabs gingham with vinegar. Quirky tidbit, their codebook, written in lemon juice between quilt layers. Splash tea to read it, if you dare. Midnight bells toll. Needles speed up. You recognize the pattern taking shape, not log cabins nor wedding rings. It's a burial shroud sized for plural marriage. 16 threads trail out the window. Weather vanes reporting militia movements. Someone's added extra notches to the Seven Sisters constellation. Fabric whispers as they fold their lies. Calico becomes aprons. Burlap returns to saddlebags. Only the smell lingers, lye soap and desperation. You pocket a stray thread. It stains your fingers the blue of abandoned temple veils. Outside, torches flicker across the Mississippi. The quilts are already breathing under 3 feet of Illinois mud. Wind stirs the empty frame. A single hexagon swings like a censer. It's blank, or seems so. Press your palm against it. The heat of 16 angry women rises through the cloth. Somewhere in Utah, a granddaughter will mistake this pattern for a melon vine. She'll stitch it into a bassinet and wonder why her baby always turns toward the northeast. You smooth the melon vine quilt beneath your palms, its stitches squirming like tadpoles under a microscope. The next scene smells of orange blossom water and deceit. Meet Miss Penelope Color, 23, betrothed, and currently scrubbing her fiancé's lip rouge off a Dresden plate block with potato vodka. 19th century hack. Distilled spirits erase more than stains. Her trousseau quilt shimmers with 30 perfect circles, each petal a silk scrap from society balls. But this 6th plate's stained berry red. How convenient that Mr. Ashbury, the banker's son, tripped onto her sewing basket last Tuesday. You spot the maid lingering near the sash window. Her apron pockets bulge with pinking shears and moral flexibility. Mainstream fact, Dresden designs exploded after the 1876 Philly Centennial. Quirky twist, brides hid whiskey flasks in their quilt rolls. Penelope's scissors snick through moiré taffeta. She's replacing the ruined block with handkerchief linen, unaware it's cut from her maid's Sunday cap. The plot thickens like starch. A knock rattles the doorframe. Penelope shoves the evidence under her bustle. Enter Mama Color. Her whalebone stays creaking union membership dues. The styles boy delivered your buttons. She drops a tin stamped McGregor's Mercantile. Inside, 30 jet beads. 60, if you count the ones rolling under the settee. Moonlight reveals the scandal. That linen replacement block. It's handkerchief fabric from Francine Duval, opera singer, and Ashbury's Tuesday diversion. The maid smirks while dusting the chifforobe. Open debate. Historians still argue whether servants swapped blocks to expose cad, or just stir trouble for better wages. You lean closer. The maid's thimble bears Ashbury's crest, a little souvenir from the stables. Penelope pricks her finger, blood blooming on a lace applique. Mama tusks. Use alum powder, girl. Stops bleeding and suitors wandering hands. The stained Dresden plate flutters into the fire. Ash rises like a guilty sigh. Wedding bells chime. Guests admire the quilt's flawless circles. Only you notice 2 blocks clash, one linen whiter than a nun's conscience. Ashbury freezes mid-toast. His cuffs missing a monogrammed square. The maid curtsies, offering more champagne. Her collar's trimmed with familiar pinked edges. Later, in the newlyweds' carriage, Penelope studies her wedding gift. The maid's note hides in the binding. Madame Duval prefers mauve lip rouge, miss. Adjusted your pattern accordingly. The quilt shifts, revealing a stitched silhouette of Ashbury kneeling before a corseted shadow. Dawn finds the quilt already repurposed. Penelope's using it to wrap broken heirlooms. A whiskey bottle clinks against the linen block, mauve stains dissolving in the gin. She's definitely not sipping. Outside, the maid boards a train west. Her trunk jingles with silver buttons and a monogrammed handkerchief collecting coal dust. The quilt ends up lining a terrier's bed. Its stink of wet dog and regret makes guests avoid the morning room. But tilt your head, sun through stained silk reveals a truth. Those Dresden plates aren't flowers at all. They're nooses, 30 of them, all slightly stretched. The terrier's quilt reeks of wet dog until smoke swallows the stench whole. Your nose twitches at a new bitterness, gunpowder, and sumac berries boiling over flame. Through the haze, women crouch like herons at river's edge. Their needles dart through burlap, splitting threads into rebellion. You recognize the pattern. Cherokee basket weaves, though soldiers call it savage doodling. Mainstream fact. After the 1838 Trail of Tears, quilters smuggled geography into stitches. Each tight coil marks mountain passes. Each gap warns of cavalry patrols. An old woman spits into her dye pot black walnut shells, and rage staining cloth the red of Georgia clay. Someone coughs, a teenage girl unraveling her skirt hem. She braids threads into a 3-strand cipher. Quirky twist guards thought the quilt's leafy motifs were just Indian decoration. Never noticed the peach pits sewn into batting, compass needles magnetized by grief. A private kicks over the dye pot. Scarlet rivulets circle his boots. He retreats like a spooked colt. The women snort. their laughter's the first warm sound in this frozen camp. Historians still argue whether these quilts guided escapes or just documented graves. You blink, sunlight glints off something in the ashes. A burned quilt's ghost lingers, its charred threads sketching a path westward. The girl tucks a berry-stained scrap into her sleeve. Tomorrow, she'll stitch it into a private's handkerchief, directions to his own outpost through a labyrinth of cottonwood trees. Dawn inspection arrives. The commandant frowns at the half-finished quilt, mocking his boots. Ugly thing. He tosses it into the fire. Women hum as flames eat the evidence. Their song sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. Watch the smoke. See how the ash swirls. 2 ridges north, a creek bending east, a copse of sheltering pines. The girl grins, pricking her finger deliberately. Blood dots the next quilt square, a bookmark for vengeance. Winter hardens around the camp. Soldiers stuff stolen quilts into their coats, shivering through patrols. None question why the fabric steers them into icy ravines. The old woman mutters, darning socks with hair ripped from her own scalp. They'll sleepwalk into their graves, following our threads. Moonlight stripes the frozen ground. The girl wriggles beneath the fence, berry juice smearing her cheeks like war paint. She leaves a trail of cloth scraps. To soldiers, it's just litter. To the escapees, it's a breadcrumb path sung by ancestral looms. By spring, the quilts have thinned, fabric migrating west. The commandant stamps his boot. A peach pit rolls into the mud. His horse spooks at the glint of a needle buried in hay. Decades later, in a museum, you'll press your palm to glass, shielding a surviving quilt. Nerdy fact, those decorative knots match survey maps from 1840s Oklahoma. But breathe on the glass fog reveals what microphones can't. Faint humming, needles ticking against thimbles, the endless weave of memory and marrow. Saltwater crusts your eyelashes. The attic smells of tide pools and lamp oil gone rancid. A widow's black mourning quilt spans the floor, its borders swallowing floorboards like high tide. You count 11 whalebone stays piercing the backing, each sharpened tip angled toward Nantucket. Mainstream fact, 19th century whaling voyages averaged 4 years. If men survived the blubber vats and typhoons, one woman stitches an 8th black border, her 3rd husband lost to a sperm whale's jaw. Historians still argue whether these widows' maps charted ghost ships or just quantified grief. Watch her fingertips, calloused from hauling rope, not needlework. She unravels her corset's whalebone ribs, stitches them into the quilt's spine. Quirky twist, whalers' wives' believed bones retained sailors' luck. The harpoon stays vibrate during nor'easters, humming like husbands snoring in wet wool. Her neighbor arrives with a briny bundle, newspaper clippings embalmed in kelp. Jenkins's crew spotted the Essex, or what the sharks left. No body means no black border yet. The widow laughs bitter as squid ink, sewing a pearl where her wedding ring once sat. Pearls overpierce the quilt's edge, one for each unburied man. Nerdy note, she soaks them in salt water each solstice to keep the sailors company. You lean closer. Those aren't pearls. They're seagull eyeballs lacquered with oyster nacre. Midnight shrieks through gaps in the clapboard. The quilt ripples, bone needles scribbling latitude coordinates in morse code against the floor. A 12-year-old girl tiptoes in her own quilt trailing. Its patterns, harpoons morphing into crucifixion nails. They're coming through the stitches, she whispers. The widow nods, pricking her thumb to dot the next pearl crimson. Outside, widows parade to the cliffs. Their quilts flap like sails, summoning husbands lost between Hatteras and the horse latitudes. Dawn reveals teeth marks on the whalebone stays. The widow files them sharper down at the docks. Fishermen avoid her each black border, predicting another wreck. Boys dare each other to touch her quilt until their palms bleed from hidden hooks. You glimpse something in the stitching, not whales. Squid tentacles coiled around schooners. A mermaid's skeleton lanced through the heart. The widow catches your look. Men fear leviathans, never see what swims beneath them. When she dies, the town burns her quilt, too many widows copying her mad stitches. Ash falls black as widow's weeds, but the pearls survive. Beachcombers still find them after winter storms, each iridescent sphere whispering foghorn lullabies. Seagulls fight over a stray eyeball pearl. It cracks open, salt spray and widows' laughter spiraling upward. Somewhere beyond the shoals, a whalebone needle pierces the horizon, threading the moon onto an invisible quilt's last border. Damp linen rasps against your palms. Each swaddling quilt in the foundling home reeks of lye soap and disappointment. The head matron snips thread ends with Baptist fervor. Her scissors flash silver as railroad spurs. Soft stitches for soft babes, she croons, though the burlap backing leaves red welts on tender skin. You lift a corner, names swarm beneath the seams. Dawson, Vogel, Cohen, faint as lice eggs, mainstream fact. The Children's Aid Society shipped 90,000 orphans westward between 1854 and 1929. Here's the catch: babies rode free if tagged domesticable. Historians still bicker whether it was Christian charity or just free labor for prairie farms. A foster mother arrives, her bonnet strings tight as nooses. She kneads the quilts like doe fingers hunting pliant children. Quirky twist: wealthy couples paid extra for linen-tested infants, meaning the fabric matched their parlor drapes. No freckled ones, she mutters, pricking a redhead's quilt with her hatpin. Watch the head matron's smirk. She slips a tiny locket into the bossiest baby's fist, its copper surface engraved Murphy. Nerdy secret foundlings with lockets fetched higher prices. The metal showed parental regard, even if pawnshops sold them by the dozen. Moonlight reveals the real artistry. Mothers stitched surnames backward during night feeds. A wet nurse hums as she works, her needle dancing around matron patrols. You squint. Those aren't threads, they're strands of her own hair dyed with walnut ink. Dawn inspection brings chaos. A farmer's wife unravels a quilt's border, screams at the hidden message. Says father hanged. The matron tuts, resewing the patch with a sunbonnet girl pattern. Later, you'll find the original words, Father Union cavalry, sliced into strands. Rain hammers the roof. A red-headed toddler traces her hidden name. Esther Marie Bowen. Too late. The foster mother chose a blonde, his quilt embroidered obedient in invisible chickpea paste. Some say the paste attracted bedbugs, but records blame the scarlet fever. You pocket a discarded scrap, sleeping babies sigh as their histories leave the room. Home that night, you hold it to the lamp. The stitching glows. Minneapolis census records reveal 12 Esther Bowens, 8 dead before 16. The 9th ran a brothel specializing in railroad magnates. Back at the orphanage, the head matron unpicks a defective quilt. Its batting spills goose down, and teeth, 43 milk teeth wrapped in newsprint. Quirky and grim, some birth mothers mailed molars as custody receipts. None ever returned. The last wagon departs its axle, creaking under quilt-sterned inventory. A girl waves goodbye with fingers raw from stitching, her own name sewn into the driver's collar. Halfway to Nebraska, he'll scratch his neck, discover Hannah in raised scars. She'll be sold twice before recognizing her handiwork. Decades later, antique dealers steam the quilts, hoping to reveal collectible surnames. They miss the meta clues. 3 knots meant syphilis. Cross-stitched pigs indicated debtors' prisons. One enthusiast sues upon finding her great-grandmother's quilt labeled slatternly, but strong-hipped. Winter unearths the darkest threads. A genealogist examines a quilt stains tea, wine. Midwife journals suggest opium-laced laudanum to keep babes quiet. You lean closer. The fibers whisper older lies, crooked wet nurses selling colicky infants to rag-and-bone men. The final quilt survives in a museum glass case. Its tag reads domestic tranquility. Tilted just so, sunlight exposes 10,000 pins spelling run. Security guards blame drafts. Historians still argue whether it's a threat or the only word the seamstress knew. The loom's shriek drowns prayer meetings. Cotton dust paints your tongue gray as Confederate bills. You press a strip of overseer chambray to the floor. It still smells of his bay rum hair tonic. Mainstream fact: Lowell Mill girls staged America's first industrial strikes over wage cuts in the 1840s. Quirky twist: their protest banners were quilted from supervisors' stolen shirts. Seam rippers became weapons of rebellion. Martha from the spinning room spits on the fabric, her teeth stained blue from arsenic-laced thread polish. Stitch his arrogance into the O, she grins. The slogan takes shape: hours or bread. Historians still feud whether it demanded shorter days or threatened to burn the bread carts. Midnight needles flash. 7 girls tailor gilt into the banner's hem. Your finger jabs a needle clean through. Blood beads scarlet. Jenny smears it into rosettes. Let the bosses see what they're costing, she hisses. Wicked rumor management displayed the bloodstained banner upside down, claiming it proved female hysteria. Dawn brings the walkout. 50 looms stand dead as July frost. You unfurl the quilted manifesto, its letters puckered where shirt buttons once anchored lies. A foreman lunges. The banner wraps his face like a shroud. Someone screams later. You'll realize it's him, inhaling cotton fibers. Pinkertons arrive with shears. They'll call it vandalism prevention. Snip, snip, fabric shreds float like surrender flags, until stitching in the border reveals its second layer. Reverse the triangles. There's the real message. Starve the spindles, nerdy secret girls, encoded strike plans in quilt block patterns. Cross-stitched X's marked informants. Payback comes on gloves. The new carding machine devours Mary's fingertips. She laughs through morphine while you embroider roses over blood spots. The foreman tacks her accident. Notice to the banner remains. You salt the paper with lye. By noon, it dissolves into a wedding lace pattern. Strike breakers arrive with Episcopal hymns, their bonnets stiff with factory owner coin. You gift them welcome quilts, stuffed with nettles and shattered bobbins. One collapses mid-curtsy. Her petticoat reveals a message sewn in hair. Scab, quirky and cruel mill nurses charged extra to remove the burrs paid in stolen strike fund coins. The shareholder's daughter visits her kid. Gloves hover over your blistered palms. Mother says you're greedy, she chirps. You smile, stitching her father's mistress's address into a handkerchief border. Next Sunday's sermon, a furious Mrs. Stockton burns 500 yards of calico off the loading dock. Hunger reshapes the protest. Girls chew on quilt batting. Taste the overseer's stolen whiskey in the cotton sizing. You auction souvenir patches to radical abolitionists. Each scrap contains a mill blueprint. Historians still clash over whether the info helped later strikes or just funded someone's opium habit. Winter freezes both sides. The owner's prized fountain ices over. You drop dye tablets to stain it menstrual crimson. They'll call it vandalism, but the village women nod at the water trough next morning. By March, every girl's quilt has a crimson border, silent solidarity in washable ink. Spring brings pink slips and pinker scars. 7 dismissed strikers march to the train station. Their amputation stumps wrapped in banner remnants. You watch from the cutting room. Their waving hands leave blood smears on the window. Decades later, a historian will argue the stains resembled rosebuds, while the Mills ledger proves they fired 93 women that day. The replacement looms arrive, steel giants fed by farmers' daughters. You tack the last quilt remnant above your station. Its faded bread, now missing the R management, thinks it's submission. You know better. Every time the shuttle flies, the dangling threads spell eat. Salt air clings to your fingertips as you kneel on marsh grass, the rag rug beneath you whispers in gullah. Woven strips of plantation dresses twist into tidal patterns, each knot tightened by 3 generations of women. Mainstream fact: Sea Island quilts encoded West African symbols. A silent rebellion stitched during praise house meetings. Your needle dips into indigo dye. Its stench chases away mosquitoes and overseer's ghosts. Watch the waves, mutters Auntie July, her hands braiding sweetgrass into the rug's edge. The pattern shifts. Coiled serpents' tails become Charleston Harbor's shipping lanes. Quirky trick: they dyed threads with crushed blackberries and chimney soot, a recipe that rots a white man's boots if stepped on. You hide a grin as a mill agent's horse throws him near your gate, its hooves sticky with purple sap. Midnight reveals the real work. The rug floats in moonlight, seaweed strands glinting where you stitched escape roots. A child's braid crowns the center, strands from every woman who vowed to cross water. Historians still clash. Were these quilts maps to freedom or charms against haints? You know the truth. Last week's storm washed up 2 rowboats where your knots pointed. Old Mrs.'s ghost hovers by the indigo vat, her death shroud stained blue from decades of stolen dye. You toss crab shells into the pot. Her spirit recoils from the Sea Island stink. Ain't your property no more. You hum, stitching her initial upside down into a egret's wing. Wicked secret: every rug sold in Charleston Market contains a single scarlet thread, snapped if the buyer beats their slaves. Dawn brings the griot's daughter. She sings into the fabric low notes, sinking into cotton warps. The rug shivers, its coiled serpents now face north. You add a lock of her hair to the batting. The final knot resists closing. They'll hunt you for this, she warns. You spit on the loom. The saliva hisses where indigo and lies mix. Bayonets flash at the crossroads. Soldiers shake out quilts, searching for contraband maps. Your rug drapes a officer's saddle, its serpent pattern loosening the girth strap. He hits mud before reaching the bridge, the same spot old Mrs. drowned her troublesome house girl. Later, you'll find his buttons sewn into the rug's border. They'll jingle during next week's midnight ferry crossing. Generations later, scholars x-ray your rug, debating if the iron scraps were weights or weapons. They'll never taste the truth, bitter as palmetto root mixed in the dye. See how the fringe tangles. That's no moth damage. That's Great Aunt July's signature. Done with her teeth when the patrols took her hands. The vat fumes cling to your lungs as you unpin Charlotte Phelps' final creation. A quilted skull, grinning with button teeth. Phrenology charts paper the walls. Dr. Coombs' Constitution of Man gathering dust by the pickle jar. Your husband's calipers lie abandoned. You trace the quilt's lobes with your thimble instead. Cautiousness shrinks beneath violet thread. Secretiveness bulges with 6 layers of batting. Mainstream fact: phrenology lectures drew hundreds to lyceums, though most attendees just snoozed through the brain diagrams. You stab the conjugal love section, your stitches looping tighter than a hangman's noose. That auburn curl peeks from your pocket, plucked from your husband's carriage cushions last Tuesday. Historians still bicker whether these science quilts mocked male arrogance or documented real mental anguish. Tulip poplar sap drips onto the skull's forehead, your version of philosophical sweat. You stuff the mother wit pouch with the mistress's hair, each strand sap-soaked for better flammability. The local paper claims combustibility studies disprove feminine hysteria. But you've read Mary Shelley. Midnight finds you embroidering cerebellum folds with arsenic green silk, same shade as the harlot's bonnet ribbons. A riddle in the quilting bee minutes, your stitches form morse-code dashes, spelling adulterer. The postmaster's newfangled telegraph manual makes handy reference. Quirky trick, Victorian wives sometimes swapped hair snippets in quilts. A silent war fought with embroidery hoops. You cough politely when Mrs. Greeley admires your avant-garde mourning piece. Let the old bat think it's a memento mori. That Boston-bound parcel sits ready, collect postage due. You tuck a coal chip between the quilt layers, insurance against damp shipping holds. The label reads Dr. H. Phelps, care of Miss L. Peckham, 34 Tremont Street. His mistress will pay to receive her own tresses. A final bill for services rendered. When the fire brigade arrives at Tremont Street next month, charred silk will smell suspiciously of lavender and rage. Back home, your husband measures clients' skulls, blind to the singed hair trailing from his cuffs. You darn socks by the hearth, knitting needles clicking like accusatory tongues. The quilting bee minutes note your improved mood, and a mysterious donation to the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Generations later, a museum conservator x-rays the surviving quilt fragment, puzzled by ferrous deposits in the benevolence sector. Her report won't mention the corset stays you hammered into shrapnel, nor the 3-day satisfaction of watching Stagecoach Express charge H. Phelps $12 for his own disgrace. Wind howls through chinked logs. Your quilting hoop holds the last intact petticoat. 5 women huddle round. Mrs. Hendricks saws whalebone stays into needles. Fever blisters split her lips as she hums Rock of Ages. You recognize her dead daughter's christening gown in the scrap pile. February of 1873 broke temperature records. Whole counties starved when trains froze to tracks. You stitch Maple's leaves from wool long johns, embroidering sap that'll never rise. Dottie Wexler gnaws a chair leg. Her teeth leave crescent moons in the pine. Someone coughs, 3 seconds too long before the sputtering stops. Quilters used chickadee breastbones as thimbles during the Little Ice Age. History won't mention your magpie nest raid last week. Frost paints lupin patterns on the window. You mimic them in flower paste applique. Your thimble finger blackens at the tip, better than feeling that bone-deep ache. Mrs. Holcomb unravels her hair, 23 inches of gray silk for tying quilt knots. Progress, she croaks, holding up a square embroidered with roast duck and peach pie. You all laugh, sharp barks swallowed by snowdrifts. The laugh dies when Eliza starts stitching her husband's initials, buried under 40 feet of avalanche. Hunger dreams seep into fabrics. Dottie's Dutch hex signs mutate into bread loaves. You prick your palm, dab blood onto imagined strawberry patches. Historians still argue whether pioneers' frost quilts signaled distress or just recorded cabin fever madness. Day 47 brings silence, the storm's rage spent. You crawl outside, sun glares off a million diamond shards. Chickadee bones litter the drifts, tiny and white as thistledown. Frost-bitten fingers fumble, threading rib fragments through Mrs. Hendrick's hair. The quilt spreads across 6 feet of crusted snow, HELP, in avian skeletons. By noon, you're stitching Clover around the letters, who says practicality trumps beauty. Dottie braids a border of mouse tails saved from winter traps. Mrs. Holcomb hums again. Her hymn syncs with the bone needle's rhythm. Spring meltwater exposes your tapestry, a sod house swallowed by chickadee femurs. Surveyors find it weeks later, mistake the L for decorative cursives. They pocket the prettiest bones, souvenirs of frontier folk art. Your blood strawberries still blush faint pink, though the jurists' report will call it pioneer dyework. Back in Chicago, a museum curator mounts the quilt under glass, labels it domestic whimsy in adversity. She doesn't notice the words second layer, the way chickadee vertebrae form morse-code dots beneath each letter. Your frozen rasp lingers in the threads, a wind chime dirge for prairie wives who chose embroidery over surrender. Dust motes swirl where sunlight slices through attic louvers. Your palm leaves a clean streak across the cedar trunk's lid. The clasp fights you, rusted from 80 summers of Mississippi humidity, until it groans open. 23 quilts exhale a cycle-old sigh, lie soap, and desperation preserved in cotton folds. You spread the first across moth-eaten horsehair plaster. Tiny X's swarm like worker bees at the borders. Each stitch pulls double duty, patching warmth into pioneer linens and covert census records into the backing. Historians love debating whether great Grammy Ida listed those 12 escaped souls under production costs to hoodwink Confederate auditors. A violet calico square catches your thumb. Its paisleys squirm under scrutiny. Turns out great-uncle Ezra's farm accident involved a shotgun and the married midwife next door. The fabric puckers where tears distorted the pattern. His widow used blackthorn needles to keep stitches straight. Quilt restorers still argue over whether that puckering's grief or cheap 19th-century thread. 3 layers down, a yellow gingham scrap winks up, untouched by time's nicotine stains. It floats atop Depression-era feed sack quilts like Noah forgot it at the Ark. Your pocket yields embroidery shears, modern steel glinting against 1893 patina. The blades hesitate, as if the cloth breathes. Threadbare patches whisper names as you work. Hattie, Elias, Thomasine, ancestors you've only met through this choir of frayed edges. That indigo hexagon, Auntie Mabel's secret second family up in Chicago, the bourbon-stained log cabin block. Grandpa Joe's still exploding shine recipe. Your needle dips, a modern polyester thread anachronism against hand-loomed cotton. The quilt's rustle approval as yellow gingham accepts its first stitch. A diagonal plunge echoing wagon ruts on the Oregon Trail. Somewhere beneath you, floorboards creak, the house recognizing its new lineage. Moonlight shifts the dust kaleidoscope. You've stitched past sunset without noticing. The final knot swells fat and proud, a 21st century tumor on 19th century austerity. 3 generations of cloth stiffen briefly, then relax into their expanded biography. Downstairs, your phone lights up with a Wikipedia alert about heirloom preservation techniques. You mute it. History's better told through this lopsided gingham star, now claiming its corner. Tomorrow's problem, explaining the attic's new vanilla sent to your spouse. Those dead quilters always did love dramatic flourishes. Moonlight pools through warped window panes, your needle rests beside a thimble of tarnished silver. The gingham star lies complete, its angles softer than the others, edges forgiving where your fingers trembled. Below the attic, floorboards hum old lullabies, the house settling into its bones. 23 quilts breathe deeper now, their stories no longer trapped between mothballed layers. You trace a frayed spiral near the trunk's corner, Great Aunt Sylvie's signature stitch. They say, though no photographs survive, a breeze stirs the cedar scent, vanilla and wood smoke, weaving through cotton like apologetic ghosts. Modernity fades with each exhale. The phones glow downstairs, reduced to firefly flickers. Your palm brushes calico paisleys, their secrets sealed under polycotton thread. The creek above isn't rats, it's great Uncle Ezra's shadow tipping an imaginary hat. Historians might call this folklore, you call it mending. Threadbare patches settle, no longer itching to confess. The trunk lid whispers shut without protest, clasp clinging to your fingerprint. Tomorrow's questions, spouse's raised brow at attic vanilla, museum emails about textile anomalies can wait until dawn licks the louvers. You take the stairs slow, each step a century lighter. Dust motes follow like obedient heirs, settling on your shoulders as you pass framed portraits. Their smiles stretch wider in the dark, relieved, perhaps, that someone finally stitched without flinching. The hall clock chimes 3 with a velvet tongue. Somewhere beneath floor joists, a single quilt corner peeks from the trunk, yellow gingham glowing like a swallowed star. It winks as you switch off the light, breathing with the house's steady ribs. Sleep comes on quilt-muffled feet. Dreams stitch inverted constellations, names like Hattie and Thomasine embroidering tomorrow's patches. Your hands, still thimble-scarred, rest open palms turned upward to catch the quiet.